Muted.
I'm going to hit record now. So this is being recorded and will be posted to the CA API management community as a video recording, as well as the slides we'll be posting there. I will send an email out to everyone who attended today's call with those links, as well as a link to the community to follow the community if you haven't yet. So let's kick it off. I'm going to pass it over to Aaron. Thank you, Aaron, today for presenting, and let me pass you the ball right now.
Great, thank you, Kristen. Have I got the ball now? Let me share my screen.
I have the slides loaded into the WebEx, so you can just advance the slides there. Aaron, are you there?
All right, everyone. Yep,
oh, okay.
I'm here now. I just wanted to sort out my little WebEx controls here. So everybody, welcome to the webcast around what's new in the newly released API Gateway version 9.1. My name is Aaron Flint. I'm a senior product manager working with the Gateway, and I've got with me Rod Mushbegi, who's also a product manager that works with the Gateway, and together we're going to be talking about the new features and new enhancements that we've done in the 9.1 version of the Gateway. So the agenda today is going to be fairly straightforward. We're going to, I'll just do a quick overview of things we've done, and then we'll get into some of the new features that we've added for the Gateway, such as the Docker containers, some silent install and configuration stuff. We've got some new license deployments. We've got some user experience enhancements for the developer, as well as some performance enhancements. We'll quickly touch on some other new features that we've added as well, and then we'll open it up for a question and answer period after that. So quickly, an overview of the 9.1 Gateway. So it is now available as of last Friday. We GA'd. We have done a little bit of everything in this release. So in the past, we've talked about some of the themes that we want to touch on when we do enhancements to the gateways and enhancements to the Gateway. So things around extensibility, around operational experience, and around the developer user experience as well. And we've tried to do a little bit of everything here in this release. So we're going to be talking today, or at least Rod is going to be talking today, about the new Docker-based gateway that we've got, the new Docker-based form factor. We'll also quickly touch on the developer workstation, which is another form factor that we've added, and is also based on a new appliance operating system and form factor. We've got a collection of what we're calling some developer user experience enhancements, so things around enabling Swagger in the policy manager, a task menu reorganization, improved audit functionality. We've also added some performance improvements, so things around making the policy manager faster, around making some of the some of the functionality that we've had in the Gateway for a long time faster and more robust, and then a few more enhancements as well that we've also done to the Gateway. So at this point, I'm going to quickly turn it over to Rod, who's going to start talking about Docker.
Hello, everyone. So one of the exciting new marquee features for this release has been our new Gateway Docker container. I'm going to kind of go through a little bit of what Docker is and then our offering as part of this presentation. First of all, what is Docker? It's really a way to, I hate to use the word containerized, but it's a way to kind of wrap up your running application with all of its dependencies in one nicely deployable bundle. So the main difference, though, because we've heard the story before, it's called virtual machines, but the main difference between this and virtual machines is for containers, it's really the bare essentials that's what's needed. So, for example, a lot of the OS layer are not necessarily bundled in with containers. Thus, it leads to why use Docker. Because of that difference and because of that mindset that all of a sudden containerization brings, it allows them to be very lightweight. Also, once you abstract away that OS layer and allow other interfaces, which we'll see in a second, to simulate that OS layer, all of a sudden your application becomes a lot more portable. You can build it once, you can run it anywhere. You can run the same Docker container you can run on your laptop, on your own workstation, is the same one that where 5 of them are running in your production environment. That really brings kind of a very nice a bit flexibility to how you get run, but also kind of some guarantees about what you're actually running. It also really, because of that, it starts to improve developer velocity. And this is what we're seeing in some of our customers as they uptake Docker, and as we see kind of the ecosystem burgeon and really pick up here, it's one of the reasons that Docker gets picked up. It's both the improvement of developer velocity and some of the other operational excellence that it brings along. So, just to kind of put some meat behind what we're talking about here, I'm going to kind of present a sample of Docker deployment model. You can actually find this on docker.com. This is where the image comes from. So really, you run containers, which are what we have right there, in the middle there. Containers are running applications that are based on images. Images can be stored locally on your running unit. This running unit is what's referred to as Docker host. For those that have ever run or utilized Docker Toolbox, which is a quick start kit to get Docker containers up and running, this is where something like the boot to Docker ISO or the boot to Docker VM that you would run inside, let's say, VirtualBox comes into play. Images can be stored locally, but a lot of times they're pulled from external repositories. The most common repository in the world is Docker Hub, which is a public repository that our image will be is on now, and it's where some of the more prominent containers are on now, or some of the prominent images are on now. For example, Nginx, which has over 10 million pulls, and CentOS and some of the other big players out there. You can also run Docker containers in local registries. When you run when you take an image and you run it as a container, you're running it on a Docker daemon, which is kind of the star of the show here. That's what takes care of simulating the operating system, and you interact with them using client tools from Docker themselves, such as the Docker client and Docker Compose and Docker Machine, which we'll see in the next slide. Now, this is one deployment model for Docker. There are different schedulers that are reusing the daemon, but they have their own kind of client tools, such as ones from Kubernetes, OpenShift. But this is kind of the sample deployment model that we've really geared us, and it's that lowest building block in the Docker world. Okay, so similarly, what is our gateway Docker deployment model? It is a part of the gateway container that we ship, which is available via Docker Hub. That's publicly available and you can pull down. As part of that, we provide a getting started guide, and the part that really makes it kind of nice is the Docker Compose client and some of the sample files that we give to that, which allow those running our Docker container to orchestrate it with a data store, which is a MySQL container, again, also pulled from the public Docker Hub. These containers can be pulled from Docker Hub and run in local registries as well, too, specifically the gateway container. And MySQL, specifically its container, has a rich documentation for various flavors of running it and various means of persisting it and running in different manners. This is kind of our sample. It's good for getting started and really starting to decide how you would persist your data, whether you're going to use different databases as a service, et cetera. Okay. So, again, the aforementioned Docker container that's available via Docker Hub. There's our page right there. On there it says, I think, as of 4 hours ago, but this is as of Friday when we GA'd our Docker container, which we're very excited about. So you can go and pull it from Docker Hub. Furthermore, we also have, I think, to really assist everyone getting up and running, we have a getting started guide. The getting started guide, what's really key about it is it not only tells you how to run our Docker container, but it allows it helps first-time users get Docker in general running for themselves, and that's why it's something that's, again, publicly available as well, too, and I highly suggest people go and take a look. Again, along with that, we have a couple of Docker Compose sample files, and they show you how, or they allow you to run them and both create a Docker-based gateway cluster and the means to take gateway Docker containers and join them to a pre-existing cluster. And again, that will allow you to build other Docker Compose files based on these samples. So as part of this effort, another kind of exciting thing that we've done is about a couple of weeks to a month before GA date, we actually took our Docker container and we ran it through a validation that we did via validate.ca.com, which is a means within CA to be able to collaborate with customers for pre-release code, and that was very valuable for the Docker container. We were able to collaborate with both internal and external folks to see, what they like and dislike about the container, documentation, et cetera. And this is something I think we want to try to do more and more in the future with lots of different types of releases from the Gateway product line. Okay, now, one thing that's interesting about the Docker container, and one thing that it kind of shows synergy between that and some of this other release that came out with the silent install and configuration, is Docker containers in general, the pattern around them is you don't SSH into them. You turn them on, and they become usable pieces of application. So in Gateway world, this basically means it's kind of hits the same problem that some of our other customers can, which is the gateways can only be configured, or could have been only configured, using our interactive text-based menu. For those that are familiar with it, this is the SSG config wizard that you would access when you SSH in as the SSG config user. This, again, doesn't play well in the Docker world. It also doesn't play well with other config management and DevOps tools such as Chef, Puppet, and Ansible that want to silently do this. So to solve this problem and kind of get great return on investment and kill multiple birds with one stone, we created a means to silently configure the gateway. Again, over SSH, but instead of having to go through a set of questions and answers, it's all done via one nice litter file. So next. So very simply, what that means is, again, if you're familiar, instead of that interaction where a customer where you had to SSH in and you had to kind of answer 8 or 9 questions and it was a lot of clicking through, instead of that, you take one litter file that you can fill up ahead of time, or a properties file you can fill up ahead of time. It's a kind of very simple key value base, and you can feed that into the gateway over SSH as it comes up, and after that you will have you could be able to do functionality like create a gateway cluster and also take a gateway node and have it join to an existing cluster. This is what's sitting inside the Docker container. The way that we feed information into the containers via environment variables, which is a very Docker-ish way of doing things, but underneath the covers we're using this functionality, and it's exciting because it can be used elsewhere as well too. Okay. So with that, I turn it back over to Aaron.
Great, thanks, Rod. So I'm going to talk now about some of the other features that we've added to the 9.1 gateway, the first of which is a new form factor for us, which is the developer license. So in previous versions of the gateway, we've always enabled the developers to be able to use the gateway for their various development processes, whether it be creating policy or managing policy together and trying to build useful features and useful functionality with the gateway. However, because of the cost structure of the gateway, it's generally been infeasible for them to each have their own gateway. So starting in 9.1, we are providing a gateway SKU that is actually geared towards the individual developer workstation license. So it's a low-cost option for individual licenses. It takes advantage of a new deployment model, which is the CentOS-based virtual appliance. It's very easy to set up, easy to deploy and manage, and now it allows individual developers to have their individual development environments for policies and APIs. So a lot more extensible for developers, a lot more usable, and a lot closer to what they're used to having in a regular, kind of development environment for, for other things. So as I said, this is running on a new CentOS-based virtual appliance that we have created for this purpose. The CentOS virtual appliance is pretty much exactly the same as the RHEL-based one, except for the obvious change where it's using CentOS as a base OS. So I'm going to get into some of the some of the usability or some of the developer user experience enhancements that we've made in the 9.1 release. The first of which is the ability to publish Swagger-based APIs through the policy manager. So in the 9.0 release, we introduced the concept of Swagger-based APIs, and we allowed the gateway to start to publish those APIs via the RESTman interface, so silently. In 9.1, we've extended that functionality to allow the same functionality to be taken advantage of via the policy manager, and users can now publish those same services via the UI that we have today. So a quick overview of what is Swagger and why is it important for us. So Swagger is a popular representation syntax for RESTful APIs and services, very similar to what WSDL is to a SOAP service. Swagger is to an API. can be represented both in JSON and XML. It's a declarative resource specification. There's no need for developers to know anything about the server-side implementation or a need for them to access server code in order to write apps that consume that particular API. So very, very strong language. It's become quite popular in the marketplace, and the gateway now supports it as well. So in order to publish a Swagger-based API via the policy manager, this will look very similar to what users currently do for SOAP services or other XML services. So the ability to invoke the publishing wizard via the task menu. I should quickly note we don't have the ability to, as with SOAP services, you would right-click on services and select, kind of publish from this or publish from that. We don't have that functionality yet, but it is available via the task menu. You would enter the location of your Swagger document. That's right, that location is used to define the validation parameters for the published service. So we actually pull down a copy of the Swagger document and we embed it within the policy and use that for future validation of any of the request and responses going in. Also used for routing. It's also important to note that we never permanently store it on the gateway. So the Swagger document should always reside with the API. That being said, we do want to keep a copy of it so that we can use it for validation. So what we do is we set up a local cache within the policy that will constantly be refreshing that Swagger document to be able to use it real time inside the policy. Then in the next tab, you would enter the information about the API for the gateway to use. You'll notice here that there are some optional validation options. So these are the types of validations that users can take advantage of because they're using Swagger. So Swagger contains a lot of, or Swagger documents contain a lot of information about the types of requests, types of responses, and some meta information about the service that it's protecting. We allow you, because we're caching that document locally, we do actually allow you to take advantage of that information and be able to validate requests and responses using the content from that Swagger document. And this is where you would set that up. Once you're done setting up, you'll have a policy that looks like this. So again, a little bit different from what we do right now for SOAP services, where, as you know, the default policy that you get with a SOAP service is simply, simply a routing assertion. So the default service you get with a Swagger-based API is a lot more involved and a lot more reflective of the dynamic nature of the API itself. Embedded inside that policy, one of the things, again, the validate against Swagger document assertion. So this allows you to change the types of validation options you've got. For example, here I've said I want to validate path and validate method, but you can select whichever ones make sense for you to define those validation parameters for a published service. It's used for routing, and again, as I mentioned, not permanently stored within the gateway itself. Policy Manager Task Menu. So this is more around developer usability and the ability to use the manager. I think this slide speaks for itself. On the left-hand side, we've got the 9.0 task menu, which was problematic for a lot of people. It tended to go very long. We didn't use a lot of, embedded menus or children menus. So as a result, it was very difficult to use. In 9.1, we've shrunk that menu down considerably. We've taken advantage of submenus. And we have now allocated all of the items to the correct menu place. So a lot more usable, a lot easier to navigate around and find the things that you're looking for. And I wanted to quickly highlight some of the Policy Manager speed improvements that we've made. So as many users may or may not know, we started running into issues where connecting the Policy Manager to a gateway that was geographically distant resulted in pretty slow login times, slow refresh times when connected. So the manager was never really built with the idea of a long, like a distant gateway being connected to. So the solution for us, we wanted to change the way the Policy Manager loads from the gateway and the way that it refreshes the information while a session is active. As a result, we've seen speed improvements anywhere from 33 to 75% faster login times with the Policy Manager. So this is something we made an incremental improvement on. I don't believe that we're done necessarily, but we're starting to build out, or at least change the way the manager is built out to do these kinds of connections. And I do envision that we'll be making more changes as time goes on in this area. So another performance improvement we've made is to the single sign-on, or as we used to know it, the CA SiteMinder request response, authorization, and authentication. So again, for users that use this functionality, they may have noticed that it was not necessarily robust. It was able to do authentication and authorization, but it wasn't very performant. So what we've done is we've added caching functionality there, specifically per agent request and response caching functionality to the gateway. This will allow users to configure caches for authn and authz request and responses, and allow those responses to be cached so that the gateway doesn't need to do a round-trip lookup each and every time it receives a request. As you can see, it's very, very configurable. Sizes, lifespans, and cache values are entirely user configurable. They can be optionally disabled, re-enabled. When enabled, we've seen very significant performance improvements for authn, authz via the gateway. And as I mentioned, this supports multiple agents, so you can actually configure a configuration for each individual agent that your gateway is talking to and connecting to for authorization and authentication. So you can set up one of these different configurations for different SiteMinder instances and be able to take advantage of that functionality, and maybe you want to have different thresholds or different levels for each of those for each of those SiteMinder instances. Finally, we've made some changes to the audit subsystem. So again, we had some functionality previously in the 9.0 release and before, where when the gateway was auditing to the audit system, if that audit system eventually became full, the gateway would stop processing traffic. Now, this was not necessarily a popular choice, and we had a lot of feedback around the fact that this should be configurable. We have made it configurable. So we've introduced a new cluster property in the 9.1 release, which was codenamed Musket internally. The audit management strategy. There's two options there, stop and bypass. Stop is the default behavior that you have today within the gateway, where the gateway will stop processing traffic until space is made available in the database. In some cases, that might be a good behavior, and users can still take advantage of that behavior if it suits their particular needs. We've now got another option, though, called bypass, where the gateway will continue processing traffic and will bypass the audit subsystem while it is full. That then gives users time to be able to go in, clear out audits, or otherwise make space available for the auditing subsystem to continue. And once there is space again, it will continue to work as it always did. So this is functionality that gives users options on how to configure their gateway to behave when the database is full for their particular scenario. I just wanted to quickly highlight some other improvements that we've made. So we've made some improvements to replay protection in clustered environments. Generally, we wanted to make sure that this worked in all cases. We changed a couple of subsystems out to make sure that we've got a more robust and a more reliable system there to offer replay protection across clusters. We've also got compatibility with JDK8 for the Talis HSM, the onboard HSM within the gateway. It has not necessarily been compatible with JDK8 before now, and we haven't been able to offer it in any of the more recent versions of the gateway. However, starting with 9.1, we can start to reoffer it again. We've also introduced support for Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7 in software form factor. We wanted to make sure that that newer OS was available to some of the users that have been asking about it, and we wanted to make sure that they could at least use RHEL 7 for software gateways, and they now can. We've also added increased support for cloud init in the gateway AMI form factor. So this utility, it allows users to take advantage of some of the Amazon, functionality within the gateway and provide a more Amazon native experience for the gateway appliance. And that is all we have today. So thanks for joining us. I just wanted to quickly open it up for questions, for some Q&A. I got a question right now. Does the cache work across nodes in the cluster? Are we talking about the SiteMinder cache in this regard? I believe we are.
Ganesh, if you can unmute your line by pressing #6 or *6 to clarify. Ganesh, are you there?
Okay, yeah, so we're talking about the SiteMinder cache. So, yeah, so yes, in fact, it does work across clusters. So it takes advantage of cluster properties. So any information you add to one cluster node for that particular configuration should in fact work on any of the nodes within that cluster.
Yeah, Krishna.
What is it? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just asking if the SiteMinder cache will work across the nodes in the cluster.
Yeah, so the actual cluster values will work across the cluster. The actual contents of the cache, though, will be node specific. So I should clarify that. I mean, so if you set up an agent configuration to have a certain size cache and a certain lifespan, that cache size and lifespan will be known across the cluster, but the individual authentications will still be on a per node basis.
Okay. Okay, but that doesn't solve the purpose, right?
I'm sorry?
I mean, that doesn't solve the purpose of cache once it is stored in a particular node, and when retrieving it goes to another node and it doesn't find it.
Then it will re-authenticate that user on that particular node. So it's not a perfect solution, but what it does is provide an incremental performance improvement for SiteMinder. So we actually do want to continue, to improve this functionality. And one of the things we want to do is make the cache, the actual auth and auth cache, shareable across the cluster. Or across cluster nodes. We just haven't done that yet. So we're starting small and we're incrementally changing that functionality as we go through time.
Sure. Thank you.
Here we have another question. What is the default setting for audit.management strategy?
So the default setting is still going to be what the default is today, which is stop. So users will need to go in and if users want to take advantage of the new functionality to bypass the audit system, they'll just have to go into that cluster property and change the management strategy.
Is there a way we can automate policy/service creation using scripts?
Hello, this is Rod. I'll answer that. There definitely is. We have different utilities that can be utilized in this case to use in to utilize in different scripting languages. Specifically, we have the GMU, Gateway Migration Utility, and that is something that you can script in, let's say, Born Again Shell or Bash scripts. Another one is you can directly interact with the RESTman API itself, or you can make REST-based calls to it. So there's definitely ways to do policy service create, that kind of policy service interaction using scripts.
Yeah, and in fact, it should be noted that functionality is not actually new. We've had the RESTman interface in the gateway for quite some time, and it's always had the ability to create policies and services, through simple scripts.
Okay, great. And also, I just opened up a poll, so if you can all take a minute to rate this webcast. Actually, it won't even take you a minute. It'll take you about 3 seconds just to rate today's webcast and let us know what you thought. So the next question is, given deployment on similar hardware, what is the relative performance difference between using a Docker container versus VMware appliance image? And then in parentheses, what performance increase, if any, can be attributed to the OS tuning with the VMware images?
So this is very interesting. It's a really good question. The idea of Docker container versus VMware appliance images, it really depends on how you tune that Docker host that's sitting underneath the container. And that's why it can vary. Again, for both of them, you can tune them such that they're faster in their own respective. So it's kind of hard at times to compare the two. That's, I think, the best way I can say it. What's also interesting about this question is you can run Docker containers on top of VMware images. So then you get not our VMware appliance images, but the other VMware appliance images. So it makes the kind of that blend even grainier. Unfortunately, so that's probably not a good way of answering this. What is, I think, the really interesting part about Docker, though, is you get this kind of portability where you can run that Docker container both locally on VMware appliance images and in various different cloud deployments as well too. So you can tweak the performance that you get out of it based on where you end up deploying it to, versus VMware, you kind of stuck to the VM image itself and possibly an ESXi host or some other type of VMware-based technology that you would run this on.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that the Docker container for us doesn't necessarily give us a performance boost or performance drop. It was never intended to be a more or less performant deployment model than the ESX or than the VMware virtual appliance. What it does give you though is a different way of deploying gateways and a different deployment paradigm. So it's really embracing a new movement around containerization. As Rod said, around the portability, the ultimate portability of the Docker container, the real ability to launch these containers in a lot of different ways in a lot of different environments.
Yeah, that's a very good summary of it right there.
I just wanted to quickly add on the follow-on there, what performance increase, if any, can be attributed to the OS tuning in the VMware images. I didn't know if that was related to the Docker versus VMware appliance, but I just wanted to quickly mention that the OS tuning does, in fact, provide a great deal of performance to that to that virtual appliance. That being said, there is also a law of diminishing returns, where the more you give it, you'll get to a point where it does perform very well. And I believe we have a VMware best practices guide that kind of try to guide you on what that sweet spot is. But we also found that as you go beyond that sweet spot, you don't necessarily get the same performance by adding more memory and or more virtual CPUs to that appliance. Bypass. So another question with the bypass option in audit management, will there be a notification sent out when the database is filled? The answer is yes. We will audit, we will enter a log, entry into the gateway logs that say your database is full, please come and do something about it. But it still will continue to function and will continue to bypass. I can't remember how often that log is entered. I believe once a minute or something like that.
Another question from Rashmi. He said, hi, thanks for answering the question on policy automation. It would be helpful if you can point us to the documentation to refer to. We're looking more at new service creation rather than migration of existing policies.
Okay. So the REST management interface actually does have some documentation built into it, where if you navigate to RESTman, if you go to a particular URI, I can't remember off the top of my head what it is, I think it's actually called the version and then /doc. It will bring up a web page that details all of the entities and also a quick example of how to invoke those entities and what the response may or may not look like. From there, it should be intuitive, or you should be able to figure out from there what types of calls you need to make and what those calls need to look like to be able to create a new service. So
do you want to send me a link to that so I can post it to everyone?
Yeah. I'll dig it up right now and I'll give it to Aaron throughout this meeting.
Okay.
I'll see if I can pull it up or do it.
I'll pull it up and I'll send it over to you so you can put it into the Q&A.
Are there any other questions? I don't see any others in the Q&A window. I did post in the chat window a little announcement about support migration that I just wanted to bring to everyone's attention while we have you here today. If you didn't see the announcement in the communities, I posted a link to the FAQ document about how support is migrating from layer7tech.com to support.ca.com, and you can read more at that link. Does anyone have any questions that they want to ask over the phone line? Again, you can unmute your line by pressing #6 or *6, or you can press the phone icon with the question mark, and I can unmute your line for you. Rashmi, did you have a question? Oh, Rashmi asked, does this now work with NIO, non-blocking IO?
Does what work? Sorry.
Oh, maybe he's referring to support. Does this now work with non-blocking IO? Is Steve in there?
Stephen Mack?
Stephen Hughes.
Stephen Hughes? I don't know if he's on the call. Stephen, are you on the call by chance?
Rashmi, are you referring to the support site? He said, does Gateway work with non-IO?
I'm not sure. I'd have to get a little more context around what that means and what it is you're trying to do. So I don't have a good answer for you now, but if you'd like to contact the support team, I'm sure we'd be able to get in contact with you and be able to at least answer that question a little bit better.
Okay. Rashmi, you can send me an email and I can put you in touch with someone. I'll put my email address right here. Hi, can you provide more inputs on it? I don't know what that is referring to. Tiru? Tiru,
I'm just going to post, I'm actually going to be posting the link for RESTman, for the RESTman documentation.
Where are you posting that?
Into the chat window.
Oh, okay.
Maybe. It won't let me click enter, Kristen. Am I able to post?
You have to click on the question that you want to answer and then hit send. Were you able to do it?
I think so. Possibly.
It says my Q&A.
Okay, RESTman documentation, yeah. I'll also post it in the chat window. Okay. Another question from Tiru. We want to find out if Gateway is built to support non-blocking I/O so that scaling the gateway will not be a problem. Is that another question for support?
Yeah, it's the same question. So Tiru is trying to expand on it. I still don't have a good answer, so we should probably take this offline and investigate a little more thoroughly with the support team as well.
Okay. All right, are there any other questions? I don't see any more in the Q&A window or the chat window. Again, you can unmute your line by pressing #6 or *6. Okay. If there are no other questions, then we'll go ahead and end today's community webcast. I want to thank Aaron and Rod for presenting today. We will post the slide deck as well as the video recording from today's webcast to the CA API management community, and I will follow up with everyone who attended today's webcast with an email, including links to those documents. All right, I hope everyone has a great rest of your week, and thank you again, Aaron and Rod.
No problem. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.